Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got George Minakakis with us today. He is the founder and CEO of an organization called the Inception Retail Group. He's got just an incredible background with experience in Canada, in retail, and other areas, and in China. And we're going to talk about some of that. But he's also a prolific commentator and author of numerous different articles and posts on what's going on. And I think bottom line, he really firmly believes that too many people, too many managers in business, too many leaders don't plan for the potential change that's coming up ahead. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. He's written a book called Predictive Leadership. He's written a couple of books. And as I mentioned, he's prolific in his commentating on current events, particularly obviously from a business standpoint and a political standpoint. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So my pleasure to have you on. Tell me, why do you think people aren't as aware of the threat of change and prepared for it as they should be?
Brian, time is an enemy, and you can get too comfortable doing what you're doing and thinking that that it's humming along and that it'll stay a course if you try to do this little tick off, kick this box in, and try a little something new that it's going to continue, but the world's changing a lot faster now, competitively, and the ability to stay in the game is getting harder. I think, what the changes that I saw between 2012 and 2019 in retail sector, for example, were clearly a sign that not only was time catching up to you, because of your inability to pivots too frequently used, but to change your organization and remain relevant. But you weren't able to keep up with the technology that has come through as well. I mean, there are people still fighting, whether, the traditional retailing versus, digital retailing.
Right.
That battle still goes on. And, but I believe that there's changes coming now that are going to make that even harder to be in traditional retailing. For example, personal AI assistants, as they get developed, we're going to find ourselves with an AI wall, which is what I call it, and that consumers are behind this AI wall with their personal assistant, have given it all types of preferences that they have, whether it's news, music, products, services. And if you want to reach that consumer, you're going to have to pay to play. And then whether or not your other problem is whether or not the consumer's AI assistant is going to actually reach out to your assistant and want to be able to do business with you. It's coming, and it's coming very quickly. And I'm astonished that after the sheer amount of failures that we saw between 2012 and 2019 in retailing, for example, that there isn't a mad rush to this. And I'm really astonished. I think I read something not too long ago in Stats Canada that the percentage of businesses that are actually pursuing artificial intelligence, for example, was under 15%. And of those
With all of the comments we get about AI on a nonstop basis, you're saying it's under 50% of the companies that are actually pursuing something.
Right. I mean, and it's astonishing, right? So
and so I presume you think AI is going to be as transformative to retailing and to general business as what, the internet or the printing press? And people use those two analogies as how dynamic it's going to be.
Probably more. I think AI is think of it this way, for you and I that have been business people, it's a second brain. Can you imagine having a subconscious that's talking to you, right? That's telling you, you've got to, here's some ideas you haven't thought of. It doesn't have a consciousness. It's not alive, but it's a second brain that actually you can post questions into, and it'll give you answers.
Interesting. It's a second brain. So some people are concerned that it's a first brain that will take over. What you're saying is it's a second brain that we can access for resources and extra thinking.
Today AI is probably the equivalent of a 5 or 7 year old in terms of reasoning. So would you turn your car over to a 5 year old to drive? No, you wouldn't, right? No one would. Maybe somebody, but generally no. And the way you need to look at AI is, no, I'm not going to turn over control to this technology, but I am going to use this technology because what it can do, versus what I can't do. It can retain a lot more information, it can recall it, and it can process it faster. That's an advantage. And if I learn to use that technology to my benefit as an executive or in any position, then I actually create value for myself and being able to add value to the organization. Because Brian, the biggest part of this is that the organizations have to become more intelligent themselves. If you watch the larger players out in the marketplace, the Amazons, the Walmarts, Loblaw, they're using AI already. I think it was maybe 2 years now
But
that,
it's not just AI. You're talking about often just thinking about what change is happening and where the future is going. Let me quote, if I could, two paragraphs from a post that you made that I thought that was really interesting. You were asking what Honda and the Canadian oil and gas industry can learn from China, Nortel, and tariffs. And you said the end of Nortel was not sudden. It was a slow motion collapse marked by fatal miscalculation. As the world shifted to mobile communications, Nortel doubled down on selling landline hardware, including efforts to export it to Asia. But those markets had already leaped ahead, embracing wireless technology at scale. Nortel's final cry wasn't technological, it was strategic. They were simply selling the wrong product to a world that had moved on. And you talk about Honda, you talk about batteries, you talk about China and their EV market. You go on to talk about pipelines, east and west, and you say that if global demand for oil and gas remains steady, it won't, and you think that nuclear will take over and other things will take over, and so with that, you make the argument that we actually get around to actually finally building these pipelines, the demand won't be there. And then your final paragraph is really interesting. You say, in the final analysis, resistance is not resilience. At some point in the future, our grandchildren and great grandchildren will be asking their parents, what the hell were they thinking first? Economically,
yeah,
socially, and finally, environmentally. It's a pretty, it's a pretty hard-hitting comment that you're making. That Nortel, that Honda, that the Canadian government, that Alberta and oil and gas business aren't thinking about the future when they're making current plans
no, they're not. They're actually thinking about this moment, and that's not
or
good
the
enough anymore.
past.
Or the past, yeah, but they're not thinking about the future, right? Look, I mean, at the end of the day, what if Europe? I think I also commented about, what if Europe actually fulfills their ambitions of saying they're going to walk away from fossil fuels by 2030, 2035? Even if you make that 2040, right? That's still only 15 years away. If it takes us 8 to 10 years to build these pipelines and find the markets to sell to, it may be too late. So we're pushing water uphill here to people who may not need it because they found a well of their own, and it's better and healthier, safer for them. So what are your other options? Who are you going to sell it to?
Who? I don't know.
Right? So I mean, you can try. Are you going to go to third world nations or rogue nations? I mean, I think that's
What
is
about the
that
argument that they're making that there is going to be a continued demand, and if we can get our liquefied natural gas to the coasts, and we can get our oil to the coasts and to the markets, we're going to be cheaper. We're going to be environmentally better. We're going to be the cleanest fossil fuel opportunity there, and it's not going to go to zero. It may go down, may flatten, but it's not going to go to zero.
right? And the cost of delivering it? Who's going to? I mean, do we have enough ships to take that liquefied natural gas to India? Because it's not going to be China. Are you going to get it to India? At what cost? Right? So I mean, that's the question. And will they have the infrastructure? They have to pay for the infrastructure to push to move that natural liquefied natural gas through. Have they done it? I mean, there's no. I mean, you want to develop these markets. It's going to take years, and by that time, things will change so much. That my grandkids will probably say like, you know, I'm driving my EV or a hydrogen car. The idea that that we can still continue to stay on the path that we're on, right? It's not wild. Hey, listen, let me back this up. 30 years ago, my boss had two admins, right? Technology comes in, we all get laptops, and then we're getting email and everything. Within a year's time, he had one admin. I moved from that company and go to another one. Five executives to one admin because technology had evolved even more. And this momentum of technology has been continuous for years. It's not going to stop. It's not going to stop because we don't like, we're afraid of letting go of a combustion engine car. As soon as somebody comes out with something better, or the infrastructure for EVs or hydrogen is developed, that car is gone. Now, I've studied um, vehicles because I love cars. And, if when I tell people that in 1918 and 1921, there was an electric car, and at that time, Edison was working on a battery that could do 300 miles. I mean, imagine if you had taken that technology at that time, much further you would be today. It's just our nature is to find the simplest road there. And the simplest road is not the cleanest or the safest all the time. And it doesn't help everybody, right? So I think that's the biggest challenge that we're faced with. And I see that in companies. They're not prepared for the future. Their focuses has been on how things used to be, 10, 15 years ago, and they think that that's going to continue. That's not how it works. We both know that.
Both know
But
that.
yet, but
Good.
it still falls apart.
This is going to be an interesting conversation tonight. We're going to take a break though for some messages, and we're going to come back in 2 minutes with our guests. And I'm going to ask him about tariffs in China because he's got a unique experience. He actually worked in China, and I think he's going to have an interesting perspective on what's going on with tariffs because he thinks that it's not about revenue. He doesn't think it's about manufacturing per se. He thinks it's about subservience. That it's Trump forcing the rest of the world into subservience. That'll be interesting. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio. I've got George Minakakis with us today. He has got an unbelievable background. He is the founder and chief executive officer of an organization, excuse me, called Inception Retail Group. He's also, and has been for the last 12 years, chair of the Milton Hydro Distribution Company. He's an author of some books. One is called The Great Transition, The Emergence of Unconventional Leadership. And he's also got Last Retail Standing, Relevant Leadership, Relevant Brand. He's been with a company called, have I got this right? Luxotera?
Exotica.
Luxottica.
Exotica.
He was country general manager and chief executive officer for 3 years and 7 months in Hong Kong and Shanghai. Before that, he was president and board director, excuse me, of the Victor Council of Canada and vice chair of Canada for One Site, formerly Gift of Sight, a country general manager for Luxottica, and before that he was with PepsiCo. So really quite an impressive background. And to that, I think you've got some interesting points of view. And I was just mentioning before the break that you've got an interesting perspective on tariffs, and you wrote that that the tariffs is not the tariffs on China and the rest of the world is not about revenue growth for the United States. It's about forcing the rest of the world into subservience to the United States. Really? Explain.
Okay, so when this all started, um, so I've lived and worked in the U.S. as well. So it's um, the nation's not new to me. But the interesting part about it is you have a president who's made a commitment that he is going to make America great again, which is fine. I think everybody should have that kind of ambition. But at the same time, I started questioning myself and say, what does he mean by these tariffs? What's the notion behind them? And I started before he even started talking about relocating companies. I said, this is about jobs. What's the easiest way for a nation to grow jobs is to take jobs from somewhere else. And how convenient it is that jobs are available in the U.S. To the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. So if you can attract work back, and you can attract work back from China and elsewhere, suddenly you have, you've increased jobs opportunities for people in your own country. So I saw that as saying, okay, there's an element here that's opening a door for something really damaging. And the second part was, if you listen to the president, he says, he doesn't refer to it as a deficit, in terms of between the two nations when it comes to trade. He refers to it as, he's subsidizing the country. Well,
Worse, he says we're being ripped off.
yeah, and exactly. And if you think about this differently, and I'm not that I'm supporting him, what he's saying, I had to rationalize it to myself. And what he's saying is, look, I want a piece of the action. You've got free trade with me, and you're making all these profits in all these different commodities. and I'm not getting anything from you. So the only way I'm going to get you to the negotiating table to give me something is I'm going to hit you with some tariffs. And when you come back, whether or not the deal is good enough, your tariffs may go to zero if you give me a big chunk of money from your profits and everything else that you're doing, or from your resources. Or I'm going to keep some I'm going to keep higher tariffs on or lower them based on what we agreed to.
Okay, so
So
you
now,
say that it's that his strategy is a way to extract value, enforce alignment, and remind the world who wrote the rules.
yep.
So given that attitude, what is the strategy or tactics maybe that Canada and the rest of the world should play with the United States?
You look, if you're in an industry, for example, that you've been making a product that you know that in 10 years' time no one's going to want anymore. Your choices are you fold up and go, you milk it till there's nothing left, or you pivot in some way and create a new product or find new markets. That is what Canada needs to do. We need to find new markets and new products that we can sell elsewhere. And I believe that the Prime Minister, Carney, said that you know our past relationship is over. He's not saying our relationship with the United States will never trade with him again, but definitely the way we were operating with the United States is over. And we need to rethink ourselves as a nation and how we're going to trade and what our economy is going to look like. So I agree with that.
So we can't fight the United States. We just gotta protect ourselves and be in the best place we can ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, and look, in China, as a nation probably has the power to do it better than anyone else does. I mean, I lived there for 3.5 years, and I saw I mean, it was very interesting for me because I saw a 1960s, 1970s economy in the 21st century. They were living in the 21st century. I was in a bus or in a car in 2007 in Shanghai, and people there were using their cell phones to connect at home with their computers. We couldn't do that stuff here. We just couldn't do it. I
So
saw Swipe.
I was in Shanghai in 1989, and from the Bund, I looked across the river to what is it, Patyong, and it was
Pudong.
warehouses. Pudong,
Yeah.
I apologize. One-story warehouses. I went back in 2007, same time period that you're talking about, and the skyscrapers were more impressive than Manhattan, more impressive than downtown Toronto. And the subway system that they put up in just a few years in anticipation of Expo, I think was several times bigger than what Toronto, Montreal, New York all had together. And it was
Yep.
put up in just a couple of years. The maglev train that came from the airport into the city was going at 300, 400 miles an hour. Like the technology was unbelievable and the infrastructure was incredible.
Exactly.
It's almost as
And
if
that
they jumped. They jumped technologically. They jumped economically. They jumped from maybe your 1970s, 1960s to beyond us.
Yeah, they did. And the leap was big. And I think they still have a few more leaps left in them. I think EVs is a great example of it. I mean, look at Honda is pulling back, trying to rethink China because they can't compete against the Chinese EV market.
So these 100% tariffs that Canada and the United States have put on Chinese electronic vehicles, are they is that the right strategy, or should we just be buying cheap Chinese vehicles?
I don't believe 100% tariffs is the right strategy. I think that the right strategy is if you really want to be a global trade economy in Canada, you need to be opening up your doors to China. And if our relationship with the US is changing, then let's start rethinking about EVs, less expensive EVs getting into Canada so that more people can buy them. And maybe they build them here as part of the deal, so that you can bolster your auto market. I think there's opportunities that need to be explored. I'm not saying they're right. Politically they could be wrong at this time. But if you think about it, um, why wouldn't you explore it? And I'm not saying China is complete to be completely trusted, but I think that there's opportunities here that we should be looking at.
Okay, so tell me what you think about this current situation between the United States and China, and by extension, Canada. So the US jacks up the tariffs on China to, excess of 100%. China reciprocates with tariffs in excess of 100%. But then it looks like both of them reduce it dramatically just over the course of the last weekend. Um, did did China win? Did the United States win? What's going on?
Um, I don't think there's any winner here. I think there's just recognition that, we got hot-headed and, one superpower, tried to pull strings on another and the other one reciprocated. I don't think anybody really won. China still has 30% tariffs and the US has 10% tariffs on their goods. So, is it a win? No, I don't think so. And we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how tomorrow's going to change, but I think that if you the problem is that we still view China as a threat to our economy, and the fear that a nation like China could actually rise technologically, and be the go-to market for a lot of other nations versus going to the U.S. That that puts pressure. And I know I read last week or earlier this week that that the U.S. is thinking of making sure that other nations raise their their tariffs as well to kind of centralize China and isolate them. And I think that is insane, absolutely insane.
They'll discipline countries that make agreements with China um, against the United States effectively.
Yeah, So I mean, how long? How long before we're told as part of a negotiating deal? I've argued like if these 145% tariffs existed, what if we're told that okay, we'll take your tariffs off, but you got to hit China in return with 145% tariffs? That means everything that comes in is going to be pretty darn expensive, right? So there's no logic to that. I just think that you're bringing the world to its knees, and these things is just things have to go back to where
That's
they
what you're
were.
arguing Trump's trying to do. He's trying to make us all subservient.
Yeah, I think that will do that. I mean, if you want to
It's
be,
pretty scary.
if
And/or
you
he's
want
trying
to,
to get us all to gift him a 747.
that's another story. You know, I, I love to fly on a 747. Um, but look, at the end of the day, the thing is that these tariffs are going to impact consumers. And if they're right now they're impacting the U.S. consumers, you and I have been around long enough to know when the Americans sneeze, we catch the flu. So if that economy starts slowing down, we're going to start slowing down.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. In the leaders debate in the last federal election, you may remember each one of the leaders was asked for what's the largest national security issue for the Canada's faced. Um, and our current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, answered China. And no one followed up asking him why or how or what do you have to do about it? If the Prime Minister of Canada thinks the biggest national security risk to Canada is China, is he right? And if so, what does he need to do? What does Canada need to do?
The question is he right? And I would argue that Russia is a far more bigger risk to Canada. I believe that North Korea and their tactics in using AI and technology to hack our marketplaces are a bigger risk. Not to say that China doesn't do that, but at the end of the day, um, China can actually be worked. You could probably work with China if you tried. Um, but I think that if you try to play politics with China, it backfires on you. And we saw
Okay,
that.
so assume whether he's right or wrong that he believes that and he's going to do stuff. What could or should he do? Or are you saying it's going to backfire and he can't do anything?
Well, what you're going to have to do then is if you're going to have to tell China, look, we want to have a relationship with you, but here's the terms of the relationship. And the Chinese respect, in my experience with the Chinese is government as well, is that they respect straightforward comments. They respect that. And if you say these are the conditions of working together, and if that trust is breached, it's over. Then you have to test the waters, in a very small way initially, and then grow from there. But you have two superpowers. Both markets are growing. The Chinese market is huge. The consumer market is huge, and a lot of Canadian companies want to sell there. You know, should you shut the door on that? I don't think so. I think you need to rethink it.
So if you were recently appointed to be Minister of Foreign Affairs or Minister of International Trade, what would you be telling the Prime Minister?
On China, I would be saying, let's identify the opportunities that would benefit both of us. and then lay down the conditions for it. But they'd have to be important enough to China so that they would want those kind of conditions in place. If they're not important enough, if you're talking about retailing, forget it. If you're talking about opening up another factory, I don't think that's going to make a difference. I think it's just really going to come down to what's going to make their economy grow and how or help them. And you have to find
The,
it.
our prime minister flew off to the UK, flew off to France, then he went to the Arctic, then he went to the United States. Does he need to go to China next?
Yes, yes, he does. I think that that relationship should be managed. Even if you
And
even if all you do is great one.
it's one that's been, I don't know about managed well or poorly, but there seems to have been a lot of issues with the imprison the two Michaels that were imprisoned, the impersonation hero, the CFO from Huawei that was kept here. So lots of issues, human rights issues, not assassination, is not the right word. The capital punishment for some Canadians that were sentenced of dealing with drugs. So some big issues between Canada and China.
Those are things you need to put on the table. Those are things that you need to put on the table and say that they're non-negotiable. And I think that if China wants to have access to markets and trade, I mean, I think we both agree there's no better nation to trade with than there is with Canada, right? I mean, we are not a nation that goes to war. We're not a nation that has a plume of spies everywhere in the world. We just don't operate that way. And our doors are always open. So I think if you looked at us as a nation that is favorable, that you would have, but you have to create that trust. And the Chinese, I think they made major mistakes with the two Michaels and the CEO of Huawei. They thought that somehow we might have been involved, but I really believe we were in the middle of this, caught in the middle. And the two Michaels were on the other end, and they just grabbed them. It could have been me, for all you know.
Could have been anybody. There's no question. Would you go back for a couple of years to Shanghai now, or you'd be pretty
Oh yeah,
trepidatious about doing
I,
so?
you know what? I mean, trepidation. No, I'd go back if I knew that I was welcome to come back. Yeah, I haven't done anything wrong, so except my comments. Other than that, I mean, look. I mean, they're a communist state with the capitalist system. It's a crazy world. When you see the military driving down the roads with Ferraris that have, they're camouflaged ready for battle. I mean, it's kind of insane to watch that. We've done business where we were looking at real estate, commercial real estate deals, retail real estate deals, and the property was owned by a general, and he wasn't allowed to use it to rent it out. So he had a mistress who he gave it to her to as a gift, and she operated, but he still owned it. And at the end of the day, I mean, she was able to lease it to us. It was just bizarre world. I mean, you kind of shake your head sometimes, and you can't believe it. But I don't believe, aside from the communist state, the people there, they're really not that different than us. And the mistakes that we could make with China is assuming that the Chinese they want democracy and they want the kind of freedoms that you have. They have a perceived freedom. They do. They just can't get on social media and say whatever they want, but they do have a perception of freedom. And they do go to parties. They do go out and have Drake fests. They do all kinds of stuff. They go to big events. You see them all the time. I remember my wife wanted to see Celine Dion, and we flew into Beijing to watch her. So, I hear the arguments, but I think that you have to realize is that if you want to do business with China, you got to accept China for who they are, but work within parameters that says this is non-negotiable.
And they've gone through a massive transformation from an impoverished country in 1950, 1960 Cultural Revolution time period, where 500 million people have now exited poverty. You've got a middle class that is booming. You've got technological advancement in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, and what, a dozen or 24 more cities. They've got numerous cities, multiples of the size of Toronto, that have got better subway systems, railway systems, factories. I had the tour of the Shanghai port. That was just the most amazing tour of advanced logistics that I've ever dreamt could exist. It was just amazing, and the biggest port in the world. We're going to take a break with George and come back in 2 minutes. And I'm going to turn to what companies should be doing. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're talking about, frankly, what the heck Canada should be doing in the world, and businesses and people, etc., with George Minakakis, who's the founder and CEO of the Inception Retail Group. And as I mentioned off the top, this man, is prolific in his postings, in his articles, in his writings. He's an author of a couple of books. He's got a illustrious business career in Canada, the United States, and China. And it's a pleasure to have him on tonight to talk about some of his perceptions and some of his recommendations. And we've talked about AI. We've talked about the United States and tariffs. We've talked about China. We've talked about Canada and what we should be doing. Now I want to talk about companies. And you posted this, which was I found really interesting, because you talked about how people in companies are worried about what's going on in Canada and the world, and so therefore corporate spending is tapering off, inventory levels are lean, and consumers are pulling back. And you said that that's rational potentially in uncertain times, but if you think about a scenario where we get a recession and inflation, stagflation, both at the same time, that history has shown that fixing one side of the problem often deepens the problem, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so you're saying, and you question what some smart moves companies make are that might not be the smart thing, about controlling operational costs, diversifying and stabilizing supply chains, and manage inventory strategically, invest in productivity, enhancing technologies, including AI, redefining customer value in an economy where discretionary income is fading fast, and rethinking our brand and organizational model. A lot of these things are spending money, investing, rather than, which is the attitude that a lot of companies take when people are going into difficult times, reduce spending, reduce inventory levels, worry about consumers. So what's your recommendation to businesses?
Let me give you an example. I spoke at a function maybe about a year and a half ago now, and they wanted me to talk about omni-channels. And so a lot of the people who were in the audience, they were struggling. They were using omni-channel and everything, but omni-channels, but what they struggled with was the ROI on this, and it's been ongoing debate for a few years. You know, that it takes so long to build a revenue stream off of these omni-channels. But I come in, and the people who had invited me to speak and said to me, like, can you be, how provocative can you be? And I said, pretty provocative. And so what I ended up doing was saying that, hey, I was in your camp at one time. I thought the same thing. We're spending all this money, not getting anything in return. But you are. And you have to think of it differently. And here's what you're getting. Your new ROI is data. And when you start collecting enough data, you'll be able to peer into those channels, and you'll be able to see which channels consumers are actually listening to when it comes to your brand, which ones are actually generating revenue and interest. And if you can start collecting that data, you can start improving the performance of your business as well. And I think that is, to me, that is the most important part. Organizations do not use information well enough. And unless they invest in it effectively, you can't. I believe that data is the kingmaker of brands and as our supply chains. So those two are kingmakers of brands. If you have the right information, you can change the direction of your company. If you have the right supply chain, you can change the direction of your company.
So you talked about the lessons from Weight Watchers. Is that a lesson, and its bankruptcy, is that a lesson of lack of data or lack of seeing the future, or it's not supply chain? Tell me about your lessons from the bankruptcy of Weight Watchers.
Okay, I think here, I think somebody, fell asleep at the wheel. You're not paying enough attention to the future and how things were changing. I mean, how could you, in a very short period of time, Brian, we saw drugs like Ozempic, right, start to reshaping the diet market in probably what, in 2 years? Now, so you need to be, if you how you miss that, and you not go back and pull back your company back and say, how can we actually change the direction that we've taken here and improve upon it? A friend of mine used to work there, and he said that part of the biggest problem they had was they had too much debt. Now, that's the reason they're filing for bankruptcy. But and if the issue is that you have too much debt, that means that you don't have enough resources to actually pivot in the right direction. They made a choice. The choice was wrong. They tried to get into the healthcare side of this, where it wasn't right. They were trying to get to dietitians and everything, which wasn't going to work for them. What they had to do is starting to ask themselves, is that can we invest in Ozempic? Can we do something different? Can we tie ourselves to Ozempic? Can we say that this is the right diet? Here's how many points you should be eating, on a regular basis, or the type of diet you should have if you want to improve your health benefits beyond this. No one saw that. I think they were just chasing the wrong tree. Look, if I can give you one other example, it goes back a few years, but I remember Payless Shoes. And Payless Shoes had over 1,000 stores. If you can imagine, 2 weeks ago, I said to you from Payless Shoes announces, we're firmly in our digital strategy, and we're well along our way. 3 weeks later, they file for bankruptcy and close 1,000 stores. You're not in the real world when you start doing this stuff. You're scrambling. And when you don't have the right strategies, you're going to be making mistakes. You're making statements, lots of crazy statements that you're in the right track, but in the meantime, the ship is sinking. I think that Weight Watchers watch their ship sink, and there
Yeah, but
was
there's
nothing.
lots of examples of this. It's Kodak that had the digital camera but didn't invest in it. Nortel that you already talked about being wedded to landline. BlackBerry versus Apple that we've heard on numerous occasions.
Blockbusters.
Blockbuster Video. So what is it? Is it just that bigger companies are dinosaurs, as one Harvard Business School professor wrote a book about, and are destined to die, or is there something that companies can do to make sure that they anticipate the future and adapt?
So I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to tell a group of people later on this month and again in June. So I've studied businesses that have been around for over 1,000 years, and they do exist. Now, a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a carpentry business in Japan that's 1,447 years old, 1,447 years old. There are hotels that are 1,300 years old. And a lot of these businesses are either in Asia or in Germany. There's a logistics company that's 500 years old in Germany. There's a vineyard, I think Santorini is the wine. They're 640 years old. You know what the secret is? They've been passed down from one generation of family to the next. That's called culture. And you learn to do things in a very effective way. Here's the thing. We can have a room of we can graduate, next week we can pull a lot of people out who have MBAs, PhDs, anything, any kind of initials you want at the end of your name, but we will not be able to keep a business from failing within 10 years. Yet these businesses have survived for 14, 1,500 years. So how do you do this? Adaptability. You learn to adapt to a different environment, and that becomes part of your culture. You learn to adopt the things that make sense. You're in a continuous learning cycle. You actually improve, you start developing the next generation of leaders who come in. You nurture your culture so you don't lose what the activities and principles that you've learned that have worked for you. And then it's all about leadership, and it's developing that right leader who's going to come in and continue to the next generation. How many companies have been able to do that?
How
Very
many?
few.
Very few.
Very few. But here's these small businesses that have been passed down for 1,400, 1,300 years,
They did
five,
it.
600 years, and they get it right.
I got to ask you about another provocative, very provocative posting that you made where you said one person can destroy Canada's economy. And it's not Donald Trump and it's not Mark Carney. It is the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. You think she can destroy Canada's economy and sovereignty? Tell me.
Okay, that's a provocative one. All right. So when I wrote that,
You wrote it. So I'm just asking you about what you wrote.
so when I wrote that, I was thinking like the timing of Carney going to the US, it was just not smart. I mean, I get what she was saying and doing, and I don't necessarily disagree with the challenges that Albertans face. But, you know, I think that if you want to be part of a nation, you need to be part of a nation. And, you know, this divisiveness that I've seen in Canada has got to stop. I can't stop it alone. Canadians all have to work together to stop it. And they have to tell their politicians to basically, who are engaged in it, just shut up. Start focusing and working together on what's important to the nation and to the people of this nation, and let's get it done. That is unification. That will ensure that every province grows, in the way that they need to grow. I think that should be our strategy. This divisiveness is flawed and it's hurting us very badly. It's not who we are. Just not.
I agree. We need to all be on Team Canada. There's just no question. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with our guest, George Minakakis, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Group. I'm having a really enjoyable conversation. I think it's a provocative one, and it's a fairly detailed one with George Minakakis, who is the CEO and founder of Inception Retail Group. He's got a illustrious career. He's got a great education. He's worked in Canada, United States, and China. He's been in retail and other sectors, and he's a prolific poster and writer. I encourage you to follow him on. How do they? Is Instagram? Is LinkedIn the best way for people to follow you, sir?
Absolutely. Yeah, LinkedIn is where I just stick to a couple of places, but LinkedIn is it.
LinkedIn is it. I got to ask you, one of your other posts was really interesting. You said the CEO's dilemma is a prisoner's dilemma, and it was in regard to adoption of AI, and the people that wanted to be a pioneer and a leader versus the people that wanted to be, I call it the farmer, but someone that wants to hold back and wait and see. Tell me what you think that dilemma is.
So I have to tell you, do you remember? I think the movie Armageddon, when the guy sat on the nuclear weapon, and he's riding it like a horse, and he's saying, "We're staying, we're going, we're staying, we're going, we're staying, we're going." Let somebody make up their mind. And I think that's the same situation with AI. Somebody has to make up their mind in the organization whether they're going to stay with what they're doing or they're going to move forward. You can't say that you're fully engaged and sophisticated organization with AI if all you do use is chatbots on your website. That's not it. It's far more than that. And it calls for investment and it calls for hiring talent and developing people and preparing your organization for a different path, and developing everyone in the organization to grow into an intelligence organization, and maybe even get rid of titles, and start calling people intelligence officers versus marketing, finance, or whatever. I think we just need a shift in paradigm, and it's going to take a lot of courage for those CEOs to do it, and they're in a dilemma. 'Cause it's the investment. They're all waiting for,
It's,
the right technology to come along.
You also wrote about how it's going to impact people, and you gave some career advice to individuals on what they should do. And you quoted on a scale of 1 to 10 how disruptive AI is going to be, and you said it was a 10. And you quoted Carl Sagan saying, "Better the hard truth, I say, than the comforting fantasy." And you're suggesting to people they stay focused, disciplined, and keep learning. Tell me about what your recommendation to people, employees, workers is in regards to AI.
Okay, so I would not look at AI as the enemy. I would look at AI as a tool that enhances your capabilities to think more objectively, more broadly, to see the world in a different way, to challenge your own thinking, and to take that technology and apply it so that you can enhance your career or your own business at some point. The access to the information that it holds, if it holds the information you need, and to pose questions to it and theories to it to what you have for your business or anything else, it can actually enhance your thinking differently so that you can act on it. Um, I use AI very frequently, and I'm amazed by what we have here. And it continues to evolve. I am not frightened by it. I'm encouraged by it. And I think that the people who see this as opportunity are less likely to be impacted in their careers negatively.
You used your analysis to look at one industry in particular that I thought was really interesting, and it gives me a sense of how dramatic the impact that could be, and it's retailing. And I love this line. You said retailers used to fight for shelf space. Now they're fighting for algorithmic relevance. So it's like shelf space on the internet. And you talked about some of the things that are going to be impacted. And I'm going to read these for everyone just so they get a sense of what George thinks some of the impacts would be on just one industry. And if he's right in this one industry, it's going to be profound elsewhere. He talks about we're going from search to ask because retailers will no longer speak directly to the consumer. They'll speak to the customer's AI assistant. What this means is that brand loyalty is being rewritten. The customer's journeys are collapsing. That data is the new packaging. That AI commerce will be its own channel. That we'll have new marketplaces, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, Google, etc. And it's about the economy and convenience. How can a retailer adapt to this world given all the change that you're suggesting?
Well, how can they not when you consider that 60% of the population lives paycheck to paycheck, and they're going to be looking for greater convenience, lower pricing, getting it faster. I think that is just going to continue to grow. I don't believe that we're suddenly going to solve affordability. AI is going to be able to help bridge that gap, but directing customers to businesses and products and services that they can afford. And I really believe that the challenge for brand names, is going to be that the consumer, as much as they'd love to own a brand, they're gonna make defer to buying something they can afford. That is a big challenge. Retailers, on the other hand, they're going to have to start investing, either if it's a big company, investing in this technology, or they're going to have to be part of a platform that provides these services for them to be visible, because the risk is being invisible in this.
You described this digital transformation for the retail sector as being a retail apocalypse. Do you really believe that?
That word has always been, pushed away by many because they don't want to hear it anymore. Um, but the default of retailers continues. Hudson's Bay, is just another example of that. And I don't believe that you can survive in this world unless you're continuously evolving. And if you look at the brands that have failed, they try to evolve or pivot far too late. And Brian, if I can make a comment, I think when ChatGPT first started out and everybody was in the panacea to say they were an AI, they're publicly traded companies, and the Securities Commission crashed down on them, and because they realized there were companies that were AI washing. They were saying they were AI sophisticated, but they weren't. So there were some fines, I think, that went out too, and now it since has stopped. But let's not confuse an Excel spreadsheet with some macro to be AI, because it's not. And I think that that's what they were trying. Some of them were trying to pitch. AI is far more sophisticated than that, and the companies that are using it are going to have all the advantages, and that's the risk, Brian, that large companies are so sophisticated that they're going to get ahead of the curve. Everybody's going to be chasing them, and they're going to be able to capture share, a much bigger portion of the pie than the mid-sized and smaller players can afford to lose.
George Minakakis, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. That's been an excellent conversation about a lot of stuff that is going on in the world today: tariffs, AI, Trump, what we've got to do in Canada, Daniel Smith and her potential impact on a unified point of view, China, and how all of this can impact countries, companies, and people. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 p.m. on 960 a.m. You can stream me online, even from Milton, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, and on social media and on YouTube and on podcast.